With a secret decision made behind closed doors by the Council of Kings, sealed envelopes were delivered weeks in advance to governors, lords, and kings throughout Europe. Secrecy was vital, for the Templars had ears in every palace, spies in every port. Female spies were their most frequently used method. These spies were usually the closest servants of important people, sometimes even their secret mistresses. When the seals were opened simultaneously, the end of the road was in sight for the most powerful men in Europe. This operation was not, as history books describe, a religious purification or cleansing of heresy. This was the first and most ruthless debt cancellation operation in history. The knights who had dispossessed kings, turning them into mere tenants on their own lands, would that morning fall into the very debt trap they had set. Today, we are deciphering the events behind that ominous dawn, the day when sealed promissory notes were torn apart in blood. We are revealing how the Templars were deprived not only of their possessions, but also of their sacred titles, how the system's most loyal spies were exposed one by one, and how the Vatican sacrificed its own army for the sake of its survival. And most importantly, we are proving with evidence that this purge was not an end, but a massive underground transformation. If you are ready, the great execution begins. Welcome to the mysterious pages of the archives of GoldAndThrones. King Philip IV of France, also known as Philip the Fair, was one of the most pragmatic and ruthless rulers history has ever seen. For him, holiness was measured by the fullness of the treasury. Holding that secret execution order he had extracted from the Council of Kings, King Philip knew one thing very well. His palace was full of spies, and every step he took was reported to the Templars. Therefore, Philip prepared his army as if he were going on a new Flanders campaign. Arms were donned, horses were saddled, but the target was not distant lands. It was the armored bankers within the kingdom. The kingdoms of Europe were in chaos at that time. Wars were growing armies, and growing armies required massive castles and logistical networks. The cost of all this was rapidly depleting royal treasuries. The economies of the states had become dependent on a single institution, the Knights Templar. The Templars were no longer just a military order. They had become Europe's most trusted financial institution. Kings reluctantly borrowed from them for wars and managed state revenues through their accounts. What it is in the modern world for an entire country's economy to be at the mercy of a single financial system, that was for the Templars in 14th century Europe. For Philip, hostile capture was the only way out. If you couldn't pay the debt, you had to destroy the creditor. With the first rays of the sun on the morning of the operation, thousands of knights were arrested while sleeping in their beds, while praying, or on castle guard duty. When Grandmaster Jacques de Molay was chained in the Paris headquarters, the decision to confiscate all the temple's property had already spread throughout Europe. However, physical elimination was not enough for the Council of Kings. The reputation of this immense power also had to be destroyed. To destroy a power that had won the people's affection and had been declared the protector of Christianity by the papacy. First, you had to defile their spirit. Therefore, Philip launched a massive organized PR and smear campaign. The Templars were accused of worshipping an idol called Baphomet in secret vaults, spitting on the cross, and performing heretical rituals in the damp dungeons of the Inquisition. Torture chambers operated like confession machines. Under torture, the knights were forced to confess to unimaginable crimes. During this process, the cracks within the system began to surface one by one. Secret spies and bought-off court officials became the first confessors. Fake caravan raids, allegations of stolen royal gold, and financial manipulation were presented to the public. Templar castles were sealed, archives were seized, and the theme was promoted that every loaf of bread the knights ate was actually stolen tax money from the people. The propaganda worked flawlessly. The knights, who were warriors of God in the eyes of the people, were transformed into heretics of darkness in a month. If you first demonize an institution in people's minds, no one would object when you physically destroy it. But what was being said behind the scenes was far more realistic. Everyone knew this wasn't a religious purge. This was a financial coup. At this point, the biggest question was, why did Pope Clement V remain silent about this massacre? Why did the Vatican wipe out this army, which it had endowed with its own privileges, in one fell swoop? The answer lay in the cold reality of power dynamics. Sometimes the system prefers to survive by sacrificing its largest components. By sacrificing the Templars, the Vatican protected its own sacred existence from the wrath of the French people. This was a strategic retreat, but this withdrawal would leave a lasting stain on the honor of the papacy. Pope Clement V, signing one of the most difficult decisions in history, officially dissolved the order, marking the end of an era. However, although Philip's operation was successful on paper, he did not obtain the enormous loot he expected. When the doors of the Temple Tower in Paris were broken down, the royal treasurers were in great shock. The vaults were empty. Just before the raids began, the entire operation was exposed by a single sentence uttered by an inexperienced young king in the Council of Kings to his mistress. The Shadow Council, the Templars' mentors, sensed the approaching storm and launched the largest asset smuggling operation in history. What happened that night, especially in the port of La Rochelle in France, still remains a mystery. Eyewitnesses described how, just before the arrests, a fleet of 18 Templar ships silently left the port and disappeared into the fog. These ships weren't just carrying gold. They were also carrying archives accumulated over centuries, promissory notes, and secret maps. The operation had physically crushed the knights, but the brain of the system had already set sail for safe harbors. In England and Spain, the Templars survived under the protection of local kings by changing their names. The Order of Jesus Christ, founded in Portugal, was simply a continuation of the knightly DNA, albeit with a changed name. The theory that the knights, who took refuge in the inaccessible valleys of the Swiss mountains, laid the foundations of today's modern Swiss banking system, was not just a rumor, but a financial necessity. Even structures like the Rose Cross that emerged in Germany were proof that the Vatican hadn't actually completely destroyed this power, but had merely incorporated it into its underground control system. On that fateful night, the archives aboard the ships that escaped La Rochelle contained information that would change world history. Maps to secret gold deposits along the Silk Road, stretching from China to India, from the depths of Anatolia to the heart of Europe, had now become shadow capital. The Templars may have been physically destroyed, but their financial DNA is the very system we use today. When you enter a bank or make a digital transfer today, you are actually using the ideas born in the labyrinth of those men in white cloaks. Sovereign debt, the model of states borrowing from banks. SWIFT in the check system, the exchange of money without physical transfer. Offshore immunity, financial havens above state borders. History does not repeat itself. Structures only evolve. The facts are clear. The Templars were not suddenly destroyed one morning. On the contrary, realizing the risks of being visible, they chose to retreat to underground financing. Power is no longer found in magnificent castles or heavy cloaks. It is hidden in digital codes, the modern equivalent of sealed papers. By the year 1314, a stake had been prepared on the banks of the Seine River in Paris for the final scene. The last Grand Master, Jacques de Molay, instead of writhing in agony as the flames began to engulf his body, made that cold cry that would be etched into history. King Philip, Pope Clement, before a year is up, I summon you to the presence of God. Was this the desperate cry of a dying man? Or was it the announcement of an execution schedule already planned by the Shadow Assembly? Interestingly, history would take this cry seriously. Both King Philip and Pope Clement died that year for unexplained, mysterious reasons. Changing the system had a price, and fate had already chosen the one who would pay it. It was Jacques de Molay's body burning on the stake. But what was actually burning was the visible form of the Templars. The Shadow Council had already given its final order. Retreat underground, hide to return stronger. Were the Templars truly finished? Or had they merely changed form? Power never disappears. It only changes hands. As the knights withdrew from the field, they had been replaced by new masters of chaos financing, more cunning and more effective bankers. In the next series, we will discuss the Templars in their new forms, the secret financiers who took over the immense throne of the Medici, the shadow bankers behind the Hanseatic League, and the German Fugger family who would achieve the greatest wealth in history. Follow the shadows, because the system is much older and much deeper than you think.